Welcome to the Healthy and Wealthy Retirement, where your certified retirement counselor, Mark Struthers, takes a holistic approach to retirement, going beyond finances and embracing holistic well-being. This YouTube channel will address not just the financial part of retirement, but also the social, the physical, and the emotional parts of retirement. Everything you need for healthier, a wealthier, and a happier retirement. Here is your host, Mark Struthers.
Hi, welcome to the Healthy and Wealthy Retirement. My name is Mark Struthers. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. And today we are talking about expenses. And expenses is a financial planning topic that doesn't get enough attention. Now, sometimes when you're talking with folks who are looking to budget, looking to save more, they often will dive into expenses and they kind of appreciate it more. It is tough for those who are kind of generally on track for retirement and they get into their 50s and 60s to say, many times they don't know what they're spending now. And then to say, what are you going to spend at retirement? And unfortunately, what you find is they might not really have a firm grasp, but they think it's going to be simple, that they could spend an hour and they got it. It's a lot like my teenage boys who, in today's world, kids just don't change tires or change oil. And I'd say, well, let's kind of run through what you do if something happens. And they say, oh, I'll sort it out. I'll YouTube it. I'll look at the manual. And, and you can sort through some things. But if you get into trouble on a cold winter's night on a narrow shoulder, you could be asking for trouble. And expenses are a little bit like that. Once you get close to retirement, saying, not just what's that number at retirement, because that defines how much you need to get to, but also, does that number change? And again, that helps define what that number that you need to get to is. And if you have a pension, how much you spend also dictates whether or not that pension is going to work. And inflation being a big factor in that. If you have a pension that goes up 1% a year and you have 3% inflation over 30 years, your purchasing power is going to erode gradually, which you could definitely, depending on when you pass or how long you live, you're talking about easily could be 20, 25% purchasing power. It's very slow. Not going to make much difference the first 5 or 10 years, but it could later on. So when we talk to clients about spending, one, we try to come up with that number at retirement. That can be an involved conversation. We have rules of thumb. We can try to make it simple. But then what happens to that number? We have 5 models that we use to model in different spending scenarios once you have that number at retirement. The main one, which you can probably guess, is called just inflation adjusted. So I'd use 3% as a round number. We don't quite use that for long-term core inflation for a number of different reasons. But if it's 3%, if you're spending a $5,000 at retirement, after year one, you would adjust that to where you're spending $5,150. And then the year after that, you would put 3% on top of the $5,150, the higher amount. And that's compounding. That's where it's inflation on top of inflation. Compounding is magical when it's working for you. If you have return and savings and interest upon interest over long time horizons, that's why kids getting involved early to have that time and the magic of compounding really get momentum and work for them. Tougher when you're talking about things like debt or purchasing power. But the inflation adjusted model is when you say if you're spending $5,000 at retirement and you're projecting forward 30 years, you obviously are going to have that number at the $60,000 a year could easily, depending on your end date, be well over double. It could be $120,000, $140,000, $50,000, depending on how far you go out to buy that same basket of goods. And you can see where, as I mentioned, pensions are problematic. That's the most conservative way. That's why we use that as the benchmark to say, what is your probability of running out of money when inflation adjusted? But then I often show them what is most likely reality. And that is number 2 is 2 and 3 here. We'll zoom in a little bit. Retirement spending smile and retirement stages. Those take into account what is most likely the real spending pattern that you will have. It's what historically people have had. And I don't think that's going to change a lot. We are healthier in retirement. We're living longer, but the retirement spending smile, which we'll bring it up here to show you what we're talking about. We'll zoom in, is that early in retirement, you're spending because you're healthy and you're excited, you might have grandkids, all those things you want to do, hiking, travel, ultra marathons, pickleball, whatever it is. You do that early on. The go-go years transition into the slow-go years, could be health-related, and that's where Gen Xers like me or millennials or Gen Z, right? That's what's next. They start to slow down. We may or may not slow down, but I think we will. I think it's not just for health reasons. I think sometimes most people, once the novelty wears off, they kind of go back to something a little more comfortable. My analogy is when you are in your 20s and you travel for work for the first time, you get your first per diem, your hotel paid for, your expense account. It's pretty awesome. You're in heaven. You're doing something that is probably fun. But what's fun at 25 really often is not fun at 45, just like what might be fun at 65 probably may not be as fun at 85, even if you are in relatively good health. So the other side of the retirement spending smile is healthcare. We always factor that in separately for clients at a higher inflation rate. So we're not talking about this end of the smile. We're talking about this right here, where your spending is probably going to slow as you go through retirement. And we model that in. So if you model that in, you don't have to get to as large a number investment-wise. So please don't do that as a way of cheating to say, some folks will data mine. I hope that's the right term, where they're going to tweak the inputs and the variables so that they can retire as soon as possible, even though they're putting their retirement in danger. Don't do that. But I will say, because there's so much evidence that this takes place, I think at least looking at what this looks like and realize the risks. Realize that if you are spending the same at 85 as you are 65, there might need to be adjustments unless your portfolio really does well. So how is that decrease in spending accounted for? Well, one of our models is called retirement spending smile because of this. And what it says is we start off with that normal inflation adjustment. And this is a client, you can see here, we're going to zoom in. This goes out to 2043. The client is 60. This was a 40-something that I want to say is like 15, 16 years away from retirement. They were going to spend roughly $4,500 a month. It's at $54,000 a year. Well, we inflated it at 2.75% to where when they got to 60, it was over $85,000. Again, that demonstrates compounding. During a normal inflation adjustment, we would just continue that. So year two, instead of $85,600, we're up to almost $88,000 and so on. And that really builds up over time. And as you'll see, when you get to age 90, that's over $193,000 just to maintain your standard of living that you'd had 30 years ago. And our assumed inflation rate could be higher or lower than reality. I use a number of different metrics to come up with that amount. Some folks use 3, some use 2.5. Pre-COVID days, certainly using 2 was not outrageous. And that's the Fed's current target. I don't think that's entirely realistic. If you look historically beyond just the last 10, 15 years or 20 years, 3% is not outrageous. So, but that's a separate conversation. So that is just a normal inflation adjustment. And you can see trying to fund that much at age 90 can be challenging. You have to have a pension that has a really good inflation adjustment, or you have to grow assets to do it. Well, in reality, with retirement spending smile, we start off with that core inflation adjustment, but we say we want to gradually reduce spending over time. So we're going to take the 2.75% in this case. You can come up with your own number. We're going to subtract 1%. So we're not decreasing. We never decrease the actual dollar amount spent. We actually increase it just at a smaller rate of 1.75%. So we're gradually reducing purchasing power over time to try to capture the fact that that's probably going to happen. Some people are terrified of longevity risk or running out of money. That's usually inflation adjusted method. Be more conservative. But if you want to get something that's probably closer to reality to where you don't die with too much money, then something like this is probably your better bet. You have risks in whatever you do. You have a risk of not getting enough return on your assets, of running out of money, but you also have a risk of losing out on memories or being too frugal, especially early in retirement. And as we talked about, those first 10 to 15 years are the ones you probably want to make the most of. They're also the riskiest years for a number of different reasons. So here we start off with the same amount as the inflation adjusted method, but we increase it at a smaller rate. So year 2, instead of 88,000, we have about 87,000. And then we increase that amount smaller each year. We have a smaller inflation rate, and each year we're adding that to a smaller amount. So it's very gradual, but when you get to age 90, this is what it looks like. So at the top here, you see the 193,000. That's to maintain your purchasing power of that roughly $85,000 at age 60. And then down below, this is retirement spending smile, which we gradually come up with a roughly about 25% difference. So we're about $144,000 at age 90. So we go from 0% difference to a decreasing purchasing power of 25%. At age 90, you could buy 25% less goods if our inflation assumptions are correct at age 60. But that's probably going to happen historically, not counting healthcare. Healthcare, we're still inflating, we're still funding that, but this is just core living expense. So which one's right for you? That's tough to say. When I show clients, it depends on the client, but usually these two are what I start with. To show them, to say, hey, this is probably what's going to happen. And are you okay with that? Are you okay taking on that risk? Keep in mind, the goal of your money isn't just to survive, the portfolio to survive. Especially if you have any equity exposure, you're probably going to die with a lot more money than you think. But the goal is to safely make the most of your money, and especially based on what reality is probably going to be, what your real spending is going to be. And that's where the retirement spending smile is something to look at. It's about making an informed decision. Financial planning is about making an informed decision. If you do that, you're going to have a healthier, a wealthier, and a happier retirement. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Hit it.